Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Blame It on the Stars. We spill all the tea on what's going on in the universe so you can blame your problems on the stars. It is Jade here.
And it's Kara.
And this week, we've got a little something special. Today, we're going to be talking all about you, who you are, the energy you give off, the vibe you have when somebody meets you for the first time. It's a special episode today, a rising sign special. In case you missed it, last week we discussed Virgo season. Last week we had a lot of things happen and a lot of changes go on. And this week it's a little bit more mellow. But if you listen to last week's episode, you'll know that during Virgo season, there's a desire to learn. So we thought, why not take advantage and, maximize on this more mellow week to get some astro basics down, dive a little deeper. We all know, we love that phrase here on this podcast, dive deeper into your rising sign.
And just to give you a heads up, next week we do have 3 things going on in the cosmos. First, Venus will enter the sign of Virgo. Then we also have Mercury retrograde coming up in the sign of Libra and a full moon in Pisces. So you're going to want to pay attention because there's a lot of things shifting and changing and going on next week.
Yeah, so just make sure you're following us as we continue to navigate your life through the stars. But after a short ad break, let's get into the episode. What is your rising sign and why does this matter? Why should you spend the next few minutes listening to this episode, listening to us talk? Let's explain why you need to know about this. Your rising sign is more than just your first impression, right? I feel like when we first learn about our rising sign, the thing that you're told is it's the mask that you wear. And it's honestly so much deeper than that. Your rising sign is how you express yourself outwardly. So yes, that like mask or first impression energy, but it also is your priorities in life. I can say when I knew more about my rising sign, even if I felt like I didn't necessarily give off that energy, it made sense in terms of how I personally set up my priorities in life. And I'm sure the same is true for you.
Your rising sign also says a lot about how you interact with and view the world around you. So just to give you an example, if you're a Sagittarius or Pisces rising, you tend to have a more optimistic view on things compared to a Virgo rising who might be a little bit more reserved and critical. Another thing to know is that the rising sign in astrology changes about approximately every 2 hours. So this is something that you do need to know your time of birth pretty exact because your rising sign is literally what's rising over the horizon at the exact time that you were born or at the exact time something's happening. So you do need to know your birth time for this.
The rising sign sets up the system of houses. So theoretically, you should be checking your horoscopes for your rising sign since the transits will be more accurate. But the rising sign in whole sign astrology is your first house. And with that being said, the first house deals with our appearance. So knowing your rising sign can explain why you might look a certain way, believe it or not. To use myself as an example, I'm a Capricorn rising, and one thing to know about Capricorn risings is they tend to have really sharp facial features, and I've noticed that's something that's definitely very prominent in my appearance is I have a very sharp jaw, very noticeable cheekbones. The facial structure, it definitely gives handsome Squidward vibes if you're Capricorn rising, but it's funny too because then you look at Cancer risings, which is the opposite rising sign, and they're known to have faces that kind of resemble the moon. So it can be useful to know more about your appearance in that regard if that's something you're just interested in by knowing your rising sign. One more last example is also too, it's said that Capricorn risings tend to have bad knees because Capricorn rules over the knees, and I've had knee problems too, and it's funny to know that now in hindsight. So there's some fun to be had by just looking at your rising sign and seeing how it might impact your appearance and even to like the way that you want to dress, like fashion wise.
Another example of this too is like I'm a Libra rising, and I know that there are some listeners who are Libra risings as well. And Libra is all about balance. So finding balance in our outfits or just symmetry could be a big thing. Pisces risings are known for that dreamy type of essence or even maximalist outfits. And then earth signs are usually, especially Taurus, very predictable and very consistent and almost like in that uniform vibe where every single day you wear a different version of like straight leg pants and a t-shirt. Then you just keep repeating it, but with different articles of clothing that are similar but different. So yeah, it really does depend too on other things that are going on in your chart, but mainly your rising sign, the energy that you give off, and also how you present yourself. If you ever feel like you just need some inspiration or you want to change things up, sometimes looking to your rising sign can be really helpful for that, and also for finding qualities in yourself that are like more obvious to others as well. And then you can kind of lean into that energy. But it's definitely not all superficial and about appearances at all, because as we mentioned earlier, it does really set up your system of houses. It is like the starting place for a lot of other things that are going on in your chart. So it is really important.
So let's dive deeper beyond the appearances, the first impression stuff. Let's talk about your chart ruler, right? There's another layer to this all. So what is the chart ruler? The chart ruler is the planet that rules your rising sign. And if you're like, okay, great, cool, why should I care about that? The transit that the planet will make, throughout its regular transit journey has a big impact on you. So we'll go through the chart rulers in just a minute, but Gemini and Virgo risings, they're ruled by Mercury. So whenever there's a Mercury retrograde, Gemini and Virgo risings feel this because their chart ruler is retrograde, right? And the same thing goes when your chart ruler is making any big transits, making any big aspects, you'll notice it more.
Yeah. In addition to that, you also might just notice your chart ruler more or really relate to it in everyday life. So, just going along with the Virgo and Gemini example, you might really relate to your Mercury placement, or it might be very prominent in your life. And I would say that that's true even if that planet is in your 12th house. And if you're new to astrology, the 12th house is usually more hidden and private, but having that connection to the first house and it being your chart ruler and your rising sign, sometimes that too can kind of bring it out or make it a little bit more prominent than it would be if it was just in the 12th house and not your chart ruler.
Well, even to just that actual planet alone, you might really relate to what that planet is all about. So to give another example, just because I feel like examples are the best way to know these things, Sagittarius and Pisces risings, they are ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is the planet that deals with luck and abundance, which is why you'll notice that sometimes Sagittarius and Pisces risings tend to have a really optimistic mentality, and I've noticed that they tend to just kind of go with the flow because they believe in luck and they know that things are going to work out, which is very different than a Capricorn or Aquarius rising, which is ruled by Saturn. And they may notice that their life has a lot of restrictions in it because Saturn is the chart ruler, which deals with restrictions and rules. So it's a very different attitude than the Sag and Pisces rising. And it's because of the chart ruler, the actual planet itself.
So just to recap, before we go through all of the rising signs and their chart ruler, it matters because it says a lot about you as a person, and then it's also really important to pay attention to in terms of the transits as well. So if you are into learning about your birth chart, then you will want to learn a little bit extra or pay extra attention to your chart ruler. And then if you're interested in tracking your transits, whether that's just listening to this podcast or if it's something that you're doing in an app or something like that, paying attention to those planet transits and any aspects that it makes to your chart will be really important for you as well. It's important in both birth charts, like natal astrology, and in transits as well.
Something you might not know is that we apply traditional astrology rules to this. So we use the traditional rulers. If you're a Scorpio rising, it can be Pluto, but it's Mars, and we'll talk about that in a second. But just wanted to throw that in there in case you Google it. It's typically using traditional rulers as the chart ruler. So with that being said, let's talk. What is your chart ruler, right? Because I'm sure you want to know this. If you are An Aries or Scorpio rising, Mars is your chart ruler.
If you're a Taurus or Libra rising, then your chart ruler is Venus.
Gemini and Virgo risings, you know this already, your chart ruler is Mercury.
Cancer risings, your chart ruler is the moon.
Leo risings, their chart ruler is the sun.
Sagittarius and Pisces risings are ruled by Jupiter.
And Capricorn and Aquarius risings are ruled by Saturn. Now, obviously, too, there's more things that you need to pay attention to, but the element that rules your rising sign can also tell you a little bit about who you are. So just to recap, right, there's fire signs, earth signs, water signs, and air signs, and that element is pretty obvious in the rising sign. And I feel like that's kind of the vibe that people get from you right away. That's kind of what the rising sign is all about. But I noticed that the element is really strong. Like an air rising is very different than an earth rising, and an earth rising is very different than a fire rising, and a fire rising is very different from a water rising. And if you can't get a person's rising sign right away, you're at least going to get the element because it's pretty obvious. So let's actually discuss what the element rising signs are like.
So if you're a Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius rising, then your rising is in a fire sign. This means that you're someone who's very passionate, outgoing, and spontaneous. Fire signs always have so much energy to them. I'm sorry for this pun, but they really light up the room. And they're also usually very encouraging and just overall excited people.
And earth risings, so Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn risings, give off a very reliable energy. It's never surprising when an earth rising is involved in leadership for some reason, because they just give off this very responsible, trustworthy type energy. The person who's going to get the job done and do it right, the person who can keep track of the details and handle it all. Now, with that being said, in addition to that, don't just think your life is to be responsible. Earth risings give off a very calm, cool, collected type vibe in that person has their life together type of way.
And then if you're an air rising, so Gemini, Libra, or Aquarius, you're probably kind of chatty. These people are known for being really good at communication. They're also typically kind of intellectual, but also not serious at the same time. They definitely can make a joke. They know how to take a joke. They're very funny and social, and they probably have friends no matter where they go. They probably know someone, or they're probably making friends, talking to people.
And water risings, Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces, are typically the friends that you go to for advice because they give off this very empathetic type of energy. Now, I will say, since water in the first house, water is emotion, you might be the type of person who wears your heart on your sleeve, or your emotions are kind of something everyone can sense a little bit. Just know that about yourself. But also, too, you do give off a very creative and intuitive, psychic vibe that I just love about water risings. Now, that's just a very general overview on the rising sign, why you need to know about it, what you should know about it, etc. But like everything in astrology, there's a lot more nuance to it, right? For example, if you have planets aspecting your rising sign, that can impact the way people perceive you. If you have planets in your first house, that can be adding some flavor into your appearance and the energy you give off. And it's going to vary person to person. So if you're like, well, now I want to know more about me. I've got this and that in my first house. I've got this planet aspecting my rising sign. I want to know. Don't worry, we got you. We do offer readings. Readings are hosted on an app called Intro. So how it works is it's basically like a FaceTime style call. You could just choose if you want the reading from either me, Jade, or Kara, and you can choose how long you want the reading for. It can be as short as 15 minutes to as long as an hour. You'll be able to chat with us, ask us your questions. We can take an in-depth look into your rising sign, into your birth chart in general. Or if you want to know more about your chart ruler, you want to know what transits your chart ruler is going to be making that you should be on the lookout for, whatever it is you want to know, you can ask us and we'll be able to answer it for you.
And if you've never booked a reading with us before, then you can use the code STARS, all caps STARS, for $20 off your first reading. The links will be in our description.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this little astro school lesson. Hope it was a nice, refreshing break from our normal jam-packed astrological transit life updates, because next week there's a lot, right? Last week you listened, you know, there's a lot of changes that went down, and there's more to come. Venus in Virgo, you're going to want to know about that one. Mercury retrograde, you also need to know about that one, and a full moon in Pisces. But anyways, make sure you're staying in the loop with us as everything is unfolding in Virgo season. You're going to want to make sure to follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter at BLME The Stars. We're also on YouTube, Blame It on the Stars podcast, posting YouTube shorts as well as this podcast, and we would love it if you subscribe to us there. That's all for now, and we'll see you all next Monday. Bye.